So I'm smiling and I'm happy with the world. If you continue to think like that, then your situation in the world will get progressively worse. It will not get better, it will get worse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any more questions? Okay. Nicolette wants to know, in Britain's Black Death, okay, just now. In Britain's Black Death, you spoke to the fact that the global powers admitted enslavement should have been considered a crime against humanity, but during enslavement, it simply wasn't considered a crime. This was somewhat used as an excuse to evade reparations. Has there been a change in the sentiment by European powers which would further help in achieving reparations?
The European powers know that slavery and genocide of the native people, that these were crimes. They knew it to be criminal because at the time there were many people, organizations, institutions who were saying that what we are doing to the native people, the genocide is a crime. What we're doing to the African people is a crime. It was a sin. So they were using different types of language. Legally, they were saying it was a crime. Morally, they were saying it was sinful. Religiously, they were saying it was unchristian. So using whatever platform they had, they described these developments as criminal. Now, if that was the case, why did it go on so long? It went on because the government and the ruling class were able to argue, yes, they might be criminal and they might be immoral, but they are in the national interest. Anytime you hear a ruling class or a government says to you that something is in the national interest, my advice to you is to think very carefully about it. Slavery, they argue, was in the national interest because we need to enslave these Africans to make enough money to build our own country. We need the slave labor. 200 years of unfree labor. In the Caribbean, Britain got 200 years of unpaid labor from 20 million people. If you consider the significance of that, 200 years of free labor from 20 million people. And they used that wealth to become the first industrial nation in the world. They used that wealth to become the first developed economy. They could not have become the first industrial nation and the most developed economy unless they had access to that wealth that was generated from the labor of 20 million people, 200 years unpaid. Now, they know of the crime. They are aware of the immorality. And how do we know that they know it's a crime? Because they admitted it all through the anti-slavery debate when they were pushing the emancipation legislation. In that bill of emancipation, and I have called the Emancipation Act the most racist act and criminal act ever to be passed in the British Parliament. People are surprised when I say that, but why is this? When the British government decided to pay reparations, to end slavery and pay reparations to the slave owners, they refused to pay reparations to the slaves whose labor they had criminally obtained, but they paid reparations to the slave owners. Time to the public communities. So I would say that a significant part of our community isn't aware of the details and the significance of what we are talking about. But then again, that was also a feature of colonization. Remember The purpose of colonization was to keep you ignorant, keep you uninformed, keep you uneducated. And this is why when we went into independence in the 60s, less than 50% of our people were functionally illiterate and therefore could not access knowledge and organized material. So yes, the whole purpose of colonization is to keep you downtrodden, keep your mind undeveloped, keep your consciousness undeveloped, so that you would accept the derelict condition in which you find yourselves. And that was the whole purpose of colonization. So it is not surprising, therefore, that the majority of people might have reservations about all of this, because it's a lack of understanding. I would ask you this question. If the governments of the Caribbean had put the issue of independence to a vote, when they went into independence, if they had put that to a vote to the public, would the majority of people have voted for independence? They had been colonized for 300 years. And if you have been colonized generation after generation after generation for 300 years, and now you have a chance to vote for your own self-emancipation, to run your own country, run your own affairs, do you think the majority of people would have had the confidence and the courage to break away from their colonizers and to say, we will take control of our destiny from here on? I don't know, but I can tell you, the leaders of the Caribbean in the 1960s did not take the chance. They did not put independence to a vote. They didn't put it to a vote directly. There was no referendum on the matter because those leaders had doubt, and they saw their role as leaders to lead their people out of bondage, to lead them out of bondage. But if you keep them in bondage and you ask them to go and vote while they're in bondage, the chances are that they will vote for their bondage, because that was all they knew. And the spirit's damaged and broken. So the leaders didn't put it to a vote. They led the people out of bondage and then created the vote for democracy. Then I will ask you another question. If the enslaved people in 1833, when that Emancipation Act was being passed, if the 600,000 enslaved people in the English Caribbean were asked to vote whether they want to remain as slaves or whether they want to vote for freedom, how can we be sure that the majority of them haven't been enslaved for 200 to 300 years? I want you to imagine 200 to 300 years. Imagine it. Parents, grandparents, children, generation after generation for 300 years. That was the only world they knew. And what we also know from the history is that those who were fighting for freedom, it was a minority. It was always a minority who were rebelling and fighting for running away from slavery. It was always a minority of brave and courageous people who say we rather die than be slaves. But that was a minority. And they were always easily defeated because they were a minority. But they carried the flag of freedom. But how do we know that the majority of African enslaved people would have voted with them? We don't know. So yes, today, here we are still. We have doubt as to whether the majority of our people will stand up. But the evidence has shown that more and more and more, we are getting a larger number of people. In the United States, for example, 20 years ago, only about 15% of the Black people said they wanted reparations, 20 years ago. But now, the surveys are showing, the polls are showing that 80% of Black people in America want reparation. How did they move from 15% 20 years ago to 80% now? Because we're talking about it, we're educating people about it, they're understanding. And the more they understand, the greater the numbers. So I believe that in a very, very short time, the vast majority of people in the Caribbean are going to be standing up for reparations. The more we discuss, the more we educate, the more we bring the facts to the table, the more people see that this is not about the past. This is about why your children are not going to university, because in Trinidad, your children might be living in Laventille. Why is it you're living in a situation where all of the children can't get a good education because they're stuck in a ghetto? You know, why are they down in the rural communities in the South and they don't have proper secondary schools and other facilities and hospitals and healthcare? Why are we so poor? Why are we so poor? It's not, we work hard. We are some of the hardest working people in the world, yet we're poor. Because the structures of our economies, the history of poverty, the history of exploitation is so powerful that the harder we work, the more it seems that our problem is growing. You know, so basically what we're saying to those who did this to us, you need to come back to the scene of your crime and sit down with us and work out a development strategy that you owe the people of the Caribbean for the 200 years of free labor from 20 million people that you used to build your country. You need to put some of that wealth back into the Caribbean. You need to put some of that wealth back into the Caribbean. You owe it to the people. It's your legal and moral duty. So, colleagues, friends and students, thank you so much. I hope we will have an opportunity at another occasion to discuss this again, because I would love to give you a report from time to time on the work that we are doing in the CARICOM Reparations Commission and the UN. I just had an opportunity to address the United Nations on this subject. And much of what I told you here this afternoon is what I told the United Nations. So look at where we are now. The United Nations is now taking responsibility for creating a forum to move this subject around across the world. And one of the great ideas that is now on the agenda is that we have proposed to the heads of governments of Africa that they must host a global reparations conference in Africa next year. We are hoping for that now, that one of the African countries will host the global reparations movement for a 2 or 3 day conference to discuss this matter. And I can tell you, if we are able to achieve this, you're looking at 20 or 30,000 people from all over the world heading out for that conference, because there's a lot of global support. Even in India, the government of India has pledged support for the reparations movement, because the government of India, they know what Britain did to India, sabotage the agriculture of the Indian people, destroy their industries, destroy their textile industries, and force India into greater poverty. The people of India also know of this, and they want to join in, and they have said India would be much further along in its development if Britain had not come in with its arms and its military and destroyed their economy. So, you know, it's going to be a global movement, and not just a movement of Black people, a movement of all people whose countries have been ravished by the military supremacy of Europe. Great moment in human history. And you're all privileged to be a part of this history today, to see that those people who committed these crimes over the last 500 years, that accountability and justice is now being called upon for all the victims. And you are here to observe this. It's a great moment to be alive. Thank you all very much.